So Serpent Mound has a very, very long prehistory timeline. The earliest artifacts that have been found at Serpent Mound date all the way back to the Paleo-Indian era. That's between 18,000 BC and about 8,000 BC. Then, at that point, that begins the Archaic era, and that lasts from 8,000 BC to about 1,000 BC. In examining all the artifacts that Harvard excavated back in the 1880s, 40% of all the lithic artifacts at Serpent Mound dated to the Archaic era. After the Archaic era begins the Adena era, and there are at least two burials that are Adena in origin. The Adena were around in Ohio from about 800 BC to about 100 BC. The big conical mound that's by the parking lot is an Adena burial mound, and so the very lowest burials in that mound were from that period. Then the Hopewell came, or the Hopewell culture sort of arose in Ohio about 100 BC, and that lasts to about 500 AD. The small conical mound next to the picnic shelter, when that was excavated, there's only one excavation photo of that, and in that photograph, they were just uncovering the burial, and underneath the left shoulder of that burial were two Hopewell points. And so we can identify at least the uppermost burial of that mound as being Hopewell. There were burials below that that might be attributed to the Adena or to the Archaic. There's a third burial mound over at Serpent Mound that's over by the gatehouse entrance, and that, in the uppermost burial in that mound, was a Fort Ancient area burial, because they found a single Fort Ancient point with that burial. But there were burials below that that Putnam identified as being the oldest burials he'd ever seen, probably dating back to the Archaic. Now, in the upper portion of the large conical mound at Serpent Mound, there were a number of additional burials. Those have been attributed to what's known as the intrusive burial mound culture. And the only thing that's known about them, really, is that they used to bury their dead in mounds that had already been previously constructed. And they were here in Ohio between 600 AD and 1000 AD. And after that starts the Fort Ancient era, which lasts up to essentially historic times. So we have a very, very long prehistory of occupation at Serpent Mound. And the question is, when was Serpent Mound constructed? So in the early 1990s, an archaeologist from the Ohio History Connection, his name is Dr. Brad Lepper, he and two amateurs excavated through the central coil pointing to the west at Serpent Mound. And that bend produced 3 carbon dates. 2 carbon dates were dated to between 900 and 1000 AD, and the third carbon date was 800 BC. Now, Dr. Lepper threw out the 800 BC date, said it wasn't relevant, and took the other 2 dates and attributed them to the Fort Ancient culture. And so all the signs got rewritten, the narrative got rewritten that Serpent Mound was constructed by the Fort Ancient people. However, it appears that Lepper got his carbon dates, his later carbon dates, from upper layers of the mound, which we now know was when Harvard reconstructed the Serpent Mound in the 1880s. They scraped up all the dirt alongside the serpent and piled it up on top. And so the upper layers of the Serpent Mound are the reconstructed portion of the earthwork. And it appears he got those dates from that backfill and not from the original core of the mound. So then in 2011 and 2012, Dr. William Romaine and several other archaeologists from Indiana University and from other archaeological firms here in Ohio got together, and they did something called the Serpent Mound Project. During the Serpent Mound Project, Indiana University did a number of cores from the top of the mound until they hit bedrock. So they just did a core all the way down, and they did that in 17 places along the bend of the Serpent. And in that coring, they found 7 places where they could do carbon dating from the very base layer of the mound, from the actual core of the original Serpent. And the median age for those 7 carbon dates came back at about 321 BC during the Adena era. So as far as we can tell, Serpent Mound was constructed during the Adena era. It was not constructed before that. The mound appears to be constructed at that time. Now, it could be that Fort Ancient Peoples, we know that they were here. They could have renovated the Serpent. They could have, patched it back up during their period of time and used it for their own cultural purposes. But they came along over 1,300 years after Serpent Mound was built.